Hello, and welcome to TrackVia's Intelligence for Admins webinar. Today we'll be focusing on advanced analytics and reporting. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. Everybody who is on this call is in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit any questions via chat, and we will follow up with those. Anything that we can't get to live, we will follow up with you after the webinar as well. You are being recorded, and once we have concluded, we will send a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording if you want to refer to it later. And I will pass everything over to Max Weldon, our implementation engineer, who is here with Derek Cotlis.
Hey everybody, I'm Max. I am an implementation engineer over here at TrackVia. Spend a lot of time with customers just like yourselves, helping to build new apps or create dashboards or just train on how best to use the system. And I'll be doing the demo portion of today, but I will kick it over to Derek for kicking off the rest of the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Max. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our first Intelligence for Admins webinar of 2022. We missed January. I'm really sorry, but we're back on track. If you haven't joined one of these before, we talk about anything TrackVia related, from designing dashboards all the way to app scripts integration. So a whole range of topics. We've got a really good one today on views, right? Not something that we've actually talked about in one of these webinars in a long time. So super excited to have Max here, one of our rock star implementation engineers who some of you have probably worked with over the past couple of years. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about the agenda. So we'll kind of first start with just a little bit of an overview of reporting, talk about some of the view types that we have available in the TrackVia system and how to help you decide which view types to use when you're building charts. Okay, and then we'll talk about some of the advanced things that you can do with views, right? And there's 4 different types of advanced column settings or ways that you can use views that we're going to talk about that Max is going to show us. So we'll go over what those are. And then Max will do the demo. So we'll jump into TrackVia. We'll take a look at live TrackVia environment with some of those views, poke around, see how everything's set up. We'll bring it back. We'll kind of talk about the key takeaways, the things that you want to remember from this webinar. And then we'll do a section for questions. Now, I'll just throw in here, if you have questions throughout the webinar, definitely don't wait to chat them through to us, right? As they come up, chat them through. If it makes sense for us to cover those, to answer them as we're going through, we'll do that. But anything we don't get to during the webinar, we'll get to at the end in this questions section. So we love to see questions coming through the whole time. And then we'll just wrap things up with some last pieces of information. Okay. One more thing I want to talk about before we jump in here. If this is your first time joining one of these Intelligence for Admins webinars, we like to give a prompt at the beginning of the webinar and then collect responses from everybody as we go through. So one thing that we'll kind of do here is I'll give you 2 prompts today, and just feel free any point during the webinar, think about it, and then answer them in the chat. Okay, you can answer one of them, you can answer both of them, you can send us as many thoughts as you want. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll actually go over some of those responses, kind of read through some of them, so that we can all learn from each other, right? Just so it's not just Max and I talking about views, we can get input from everybody on the call, right? Help everybody learn from everybody. So, the bonus is anybody that contributes to the webinar today via chat, by answering one of the prompts or sending through questions, we'll pick a couple of you at the end of the day, and we'll get some TrackVia swag sent out to you as well. So maybe a water bottle, I don't know, something cool. We'll see. Okay. All right, let's get into it. So just talk about a little bit of an overview of reporting here. Now, if we just are thinking about the framework or the three pillars that make up the TrackVia platform, one of them is acquiring data. Okay, so this is kind of a concept. These three pillars is a concept you may have heard before, but the first is acquiring data, which is, building forms, right? Or importing data through a spreadsheet, or building an integration to get data into TrackVia, right? Many different ways that you can get data into the system, right? So that's the first pillar, is acquiring data. The second pillar is acting on that data. So these are features that we build to help you act, right? And not just look at the data. So these are features like notification rules, or the ability to build a view that's filtered so that the person looking at the view will see just what they're supposed to do for the day, or something like that. And then the third pillar is what we're talking about today, which is analyzing the data. So taking everything that you've collected, charting it, making it into a visual, and gaining information from it, okay? So we're talking about that analyze piece. All right, now there are a lot of different types of ways that you can analyze and visualize the data that you're collecting, okay? So I'm gonna give you your prompts, and the prompts now that you can answer throughout the webinar. The first one is, what is your favorite view type, okay, in TrackVia, and why? Okay, so it could be a map, or it could be a scatter plot, or it could be a Pareto. Not playing favorites here, but my favorite is the Pareto, right? So some of you may have heard me say that before. So yeah, first prompt, favorite type of view and why, right? And we'll see what we kind of get there for responses. The other one is, as we're going through some of these view types today, as Max is showing you some cool things that you can do with your views, if you see something that resonates with you, that you think you could use in your account or in your application, feel free to chat us through how you think you could use it, right? The use case for one of those things, okay? So feel free to answer one or both of those questions. All right, so there's a lot of different types of views in TrackVia, right? How do you choose the right one to use? Well, there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at this and slice this, but we've come up with a couple of questions that you can ask yourself to prep for the view that you're going to create, okay? The first one is, who's going to be looking at the view? Some folks are more visual type people, right? And some folks like to see the numbers, right? I learned pretty quickly that my manager is a numbers guy, right? So when I was showing him a chart, he'd always say, cool, where are the numbers? Where's the data, right? So think of it that way. And are you going to want to create a visual and a chart, or numbers, or maybe both to complement each other, right? But think about who is going to be looking at the data. Second question, how much data will there be? Are you going to be charting 5 data points or 5,000 data points, right? Are you going to be grouping your data, and are there going to be 5 groups or 25 groups, right? There's lots of different, I guess I should say, the amount of data that you're going to be trying to put onto your view may dictate which view type you want to use, because certain view types lend themselves better to more data or less data, right? So how much data is there? And then the ultimate question really is, what are you trying to show, right? So are you trying to show trending over time? Are you trying to see 2 things relative to each other? Are you trying to see a proportion of a whole, right? There's a lot of things that you might be trying to show or answer questions about, and different view types are good for those different things. So we'll dig into those a little bit here, and we'll see when you might want to use each chart type. Okay, so we've got a lot of different chart types. There's probably over a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, if I'm thinking about that right. But here's an example of 4 of them. And I'm not going to go through each one of the dozen, right? But just some examples on when charts like these, which are some of the more commonly used charts, are good to use, right? So first, we got the line chart here in the upper left. Line charts are great for trending things over time. You can see here that this is, I think it's the number of orders plotted over a year period from February 2017 to March 2018. A major benefit of the line chart, though, is that it can house a lot of data, right? You could easily have 2, 3, 5 years displayed on this line chart, and while the axis might get a little scrunched, right, with the labels, you're still going to be able to see that trend over the entire period. So can handle large data sets quite easily, right? Next thing is the scatter plot. Scatter plots are best when you're trying to see the correlation between two independent variables. In this case, it might be a little small for you, but you can see on the horizontal axis, we've got time, vertical is value. So these are projects, right? How much value is the project going to bring and how long is it going to take to complete? And you can kind of see that there's a general correlation of, up and to the right. The more time it takes, the more value it provides. So really good for looking at large data sets, because if you just have 5 points on there, not going to be super valuable in terms of, you're not going to be able to probably see a correlation, right? But once you've got a fair amount of data points, you can start to see outliers as well, such as that point up there in the top left quadrant, if you will. It's only going to take 3 weeks, $400,000. What's going on with that project? Let's drill into it, right? So good to compare two independent variables here and see the correlation. Pie charts are really good for seeing the proportion of a grouping to the whole data set, right? So I think this chart was built, there's no labels, I should have included labels, but it's built to show how people are paying for orders. The green slice is they're paying by, card, and the red is, or the green slice is cash, I think, red is card, blue is PayPal. So you can see out of all the orders, 57% of them are card. Most people are paying with card, right? So pies, really good for looking at the proportion of the whole data set. And then finally, our bars and our column charts, which are similar, just kind of rotated orientation, is really good for categorizing data, right? So we can see here that we have bucketed our data into 3 groupings. And it's by customer, Beyonce, Lindsay, Leonardo, right? And we can see that Beyonce, compared to Leo, has spent a lot more money with us, right? We can very, very quickly see that information just by looking at the bars, right? So good for comparing things to each other, good for categorizing things. What it's not super good for is large data sets like some of the other ones. You could imagine if you had 100 customers instead of just 3, that bar chart would look really squished and messy, right? So maybe not the best option for a bar chart if you're dealing with a lot of groupings, right? So those are just some of the things that you want to think about as you're putting together these views. I see a lot of ideas coming in the chat, which is awesome. We'll get to all those later. Thank you, everybody, for your ideas. Keep them coming. All right, so what is Max going to be talking about? Let's see. So 4 different things that you can do with your charts and views to take them to the next level. First is provide multiple groupings, right? The charts that I just showed you all had one grouping, group by customer, group by payment type, or by month of order, right? You can group by multiple things in one chart, and that provides an additional level of data to look at right there in that view. Same thing goes with your aggregates. So when I say aggregates, I mean summing up the amount of money that each customer has spent with us, or counting how many orders have occurred, right? Your aggregates are that count and that sum, or the average, right? You can add multiple of those to a single view to dive a layer deeper as well. We're also going to look at the kind of the opposite side of that coin, which is no groupings. And this is kind of a cool way to use a view that I think may get overlooked sometimes, but you can elect to build a view and not group the data. And that has some really cool behavior that we'll look at. And then Last but not least here, a lot of times when you're getting into building your views and trying to visualize data, sometimes you may need to build a calculation in order to see the information that you want. So Max is going to walk us through how you do that and when that might occur with a chart. So enough of me. We'll turn things over to Max here for our TrackVia Demo portion of the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Derek. All right. Here we are. We are in TrackVia. We're on a dashboard. And a lot of the data we're going to be working with today is going to be, for those of you who are taking TVU level 1, it's going to look pretty familiar. We're working with our same kind of like sales model here. Our example is that we are tracking orders from a few of our customers for cell phones. So that's some of the context you'll need to get into this. But let's just hop in. So we're first going to look at, just like Derek said, multiple groupings within a view. And so here we're working on, let's see if I can get that bottom x-axis to show. There you go. We're looking at a stacked bar chart. So this is great for multiple groupings of data. You can see here on the x-axis, we're grouping our orders, our total number of units sold per order by the quarter in which that order was placed. And then these stacks are the product that was sold. So you can see on the right-hand side, we're selling Google Pixels, Samsung Galaxies, Apple iPhones, and this is super helpful for seeing kind of at a quick glance where the majority of our sales is coming from per quarter. So you can see here, Q3, the majority of our sales came from selling iPhones. We sold 302. You can double click on these, as many of you know with bar charts, and just see that disaggregate or that subset of data that falls into, in this case, Q3 of 2017 iPhone 8 sales. And you can see exactly who made these sales. Lindsey Vonn, Beyonce, and Leo are our same customers here. And that's generally how to configure this. One thing that I did that some of you may also know how to do is change the colors of these stacks so that they make more sense to me. That's if you open up this right-hand side here, you can click change colors. And in here, you can see I've had all the pixels in different shades of blue, the Galaxies in shades of red, and the iPhones in shades of green, so that I can also see a little bit more information out of this, just as to generally like which makers, which companies are we buying these phones from, not just which models. So let's get in how to set this up. We go to the view editor here, and we'll go to the format tab. All of this, this is where we'll be spending most of our view building time. We chose the stacked bar chart here, the vertical orientation. And once you click on that, then you can set this up. Our two groupings are up here. The first grouping is going to be what's on the x-axis. So right now we've set this up to be the order date rolled up by quarter is our x-axis, and then our stacks or our like column pieces are the product. If we were to switch the order here, you'll see that the x-axis then becomes our products and our stacks become our quarters. I think in this case, it makes more sense to have the quarters as the x-axis, but you can imagine a case where that inverting these might be helpful. And then what we're summing up here is the quantity. So we have our aggregation of order quantities. Some other examples that you might use this for, I've seen this used for determining how many employees are at specific locations or offices for a company, and what roles those employees are in. So you can imagine maybe the x-axis here are your offices, and then you might have different stacked column pieces for accounting staff and salespeople and managers, so you can quickly see how many of each employee are at a specific location, something like that. We will not save this, so we'll just keep it as is. But that is the stacked, I think, stacked column chart. we'll move forward to a little bit different, but very similar style of chart here. This is going to be our side-by-side columns, our side bar chart. This is very similar. We're looking at the same data. We're just grouping it in a slightly different way. In this case, we are grouping it up by the product. You can see that down below. And then we are aggregating two different things per product. So we're aggregating both the number of units ordered and the number of units returned per product over this time. And so this really allows us to get a little more information about a specific product, since we are tracking multiple things per order. One unique thing about this side-by-side bar chart is the scale here. You'll notice a third of this on the y-axis goes from 0 to 10, and then another third goes 90 units more up to 100, and then still another third increases by 400 units up to 500. So this is called a log scale for our view builders. This allows us to compare two data sets in one view that might have very different orders of magnitude. So in our case, the amount ordered per order, or the amount of units, the quantity per order, is significantly higher than the amount returned. We're talking like an average order has maybe 30 units ordered and 1 or 2 returned. But we want to see all that information on one single view. And so we logged the scale of the y-axis to allow us to see both of these quantities in a meaningful way. So you can see, this Pixel 2 XL had 3 returned, and this bar for the ordered quantity for the regular Pixel is 530. This is obviously not, hundreds of times larger than this, the amount of returned here, but it allows us to compare kind of apples to apples across these different products more easily. So we can see how the amount returned in the Pixel 2 XL compares to the Galaxy S8 Edge a little more easily. So let's get into the editor and show you how this was made. Again, we're going to the Format tab, and this is our side-by-side columns. We grouped by product, and you can see we chose multiple things on the y-axis to sum up. So we're summing up the amount ordered, the amount returned. But on the Customize tab, you can click this checkbox to log scale, which TrackVia does automatically and kind of levels out your data sets so that it all fits well on one page. So if we were to uncheck this, you can see this is what it would typically look like. And you can see it's a little harder to compare. For instance, when we were looking at the Pixel 2 XL, it's really hard to tell how many were in there. It's very obvious that it's it's really small, but it's hard to actually compare it against these other ones because they're so small that they all almost look the same. So when we log that scale, we can more clearly differentiate the Pixel 2 XL to the S8 Edge and the S9, so that we can compare these more easily. Let's not save that. And again, as with all of this, you can double click and drill through to get those individual orders, and then click on a specific order if you wanted to get more detail there. All right, next up, we're gonna do a pivot chart. And I saw in the chat that this is already coming in as some people's favorites. So sounds like a lot of you are familiar with this. This is an example of being able to do both multiple groupings of data and multiple aggregates, and we'll get into how to do that in just a second. But a pivot chart is pretty standard. If you've worked with Excel, you probably know how to do a pivot chart as well. But in our case, we are pivoting the same orders by customers. Those are up here on the top. And then by products, and those products we even have divided out more by the quarter in which that order was placed. So you can see we can roll these up by collapsing the drop downs here to see totals per product alone. And then if you want more detail, if we wanted to know in which quarter Beyonce bought these iPhone 8s, we can open this up and see the majority of them were bought in Q3. And then of course, just like with all of our views, you can double click and see the actual data behind those numbers, so that you can drill down even more if you want that. In order to build this, pivot charts start with or pivot tables start with a grid view. So once you have a grid view of the data you want, you can click on the hamburger menu on the right and click this pivot. And this will open up a side panel for the pivot builder. It's pretty simple. You can choose which rows that you want. In our case, we have rows for the product, as well as the order date rolled up by quarter, as you all can kind of see. The columns, we chose customer, and then our quantities that or our values that show up. Right now, we're only summing up one quantity, but we can actually do a second aggregate here, and we'll say, much like that side-by-side column chart, let's put in the quantity returned and sum that up as well, so you can see both of these in one chart. This looks a little more wild. There's a lot more numbers on here, double the amount. So, but it is a lot more information as well. So if you like seeing the numbers, you want it all in front of you in one place, this kind of multiple groupings and multiple aggregates might be your place to go. This is very data rich or data dense, so you can get a lot of information from one view here. We can drill down and see exactly which orders Beyonce returned of Galaxy S8s by just double clicking here. You can see all of those orders, and then you could drill down into them individually if you wanted as well. All right.
Cool, Max. We've got a couple of questions that I think we've got a lot of questions. A couple make sense to talk about right now.
Cool.
Yeah, let's see. I think Rashida, you asked if there are any limitations on the data set for the non-stacked column chart. So I think, yeah, that order versus returned. Yeah. So limitations on that one, Max.
Yeah. I think it is a little bit harder to. I think it can be done actually, but it's harder if if all of the data sets that you're aggregating aren't numeric or in the same number. So if you're doing like decimal points in one data set and hundreds in another set, it gets harder the further away that these orders of magnitude are, it gets harder to put on one logged scale view, if that makes sense. I think that's one of the limitations I'd put on that.
Yeah, the other one that I would throw in is probably not necessarily a system limitation, but the one I mentioned before that, right here, you have how many 15 different bars, like if you're going to have 50 bars, I mean, it's a limitation in a sense, right? But the chart is not going to be super helpful if everything is crazy narrow and you can't see anything really. So that's more of just a limitation on, in general using a bar chart. But yeah, that's probably the only one that I can think of as well there.
Great.
And then a follow-up question on from Rashida on limitations with pivot views. So the limitation there, Rashida, is less around number of records that you're plotting and more around the number of data points that you can plot using the pivot. So a pivot with this, I believe the number, Max, correct me if I'm wrong here, is 2,500 data points that can appear in the pivot. So if you actually look at the pivot that Max has here on the screen, there's like all the numbers that you see there filled in within the matrix, maybe there's 100 of them right now. So up to 2,500 of those for that one.
Yeah, we're talking like cells kind of. If each of these categories is one cell, then it'd be 2,500 of those.
Cool. And then Max, I think we have a question from, where did it go? I can't see, I'm sorry who asked this, but it was about the returned quantity and the ordered quantity and just how those are being captured, what types of fields those are.
Sure. Yeah, let's drill down into one of these. They're both just number fields entered when you place an order. So if I place an order, then yeah, here this top order was a quantity of 2 with a returned value of 0. These are just number fields right now.
And then we've got a question from Ed Max, who wants to know just the most efficient way to duplicate a chart and change the chart type. So maybe on like that stacked bar that you had, how would you potentially convert that into a line, right?
Yeah. So you can open up this hamburger menu and create a new view from it. This will duplicate the chart as you have it. So stacked chart to line, we'll call it maybe. And then here in the format tab, you can go over and change the chart type. We could put this as a line, and there you go. If I were to click save, this is now a new view in our system. It looks way different because now we're, doing lines per quarter per product, but you can see all of these individually. Does that answer
Awesome.
that one?
Cool. Let's yeah, more questions to come. Let's keep it going.
Cool. All right. We're now going to get into a couple of views that don't use any grouping. And we'll start out with a line chart. The example here that I'm going to kind of make up is imagine you're like performing quality assurance tests on some sort of appliance, and those tests return numeric values, and the numeric values you're looking for are between 4 and 6. So maybe I'm doing some tests here. I had 1 of 4, I have 1 of 6, 1 of 5, maybe 1 of 7, and we'll just put a few more in here. So you can see as I'm doing this, the chart on the right is adding these records one by one. So these are individual records. They're not being grouped. They're just being plotted on a line chart against time. And so now that I've waited a few extra seconds, if we enter another one here, let's do 3 just to show you. There's a bit of a longer space between this record and the previous one because we're doing it over time. And this graph does its best to kind of scale for what would look best, what would make your data most usable or visible. So what we're charting here is this observed value over time. And we're also charting a couple of other fields which kind of represent the upper and lower bounds that we're looking for, so that we can quickly take a look at this chart and see, and I'll just make it a little bigger for you. These gray lines represent our limits, and the red line represents what we actually entered. I'll get into kind of what the point of this is in a second, but I'll also just pull up the fact that I was able to, change the colors for this as well to make it more easy to see the data we want against the boundaries here in gray. So the helpful part of an ungrouped view is you can, with one click, drill into a specific record. So looking at this, we can tell most of our data has been within our acceptable bounds, but this one here has an observed value of 7, which is higher than our boundary. So I can click on that and open up the observed value record, that individual record, number 88. We can see the test time, who tested it, and what the observed value is. So now I could follow up with Derek on this and say, hey, what happened with test 88? We need to go back to that appliance, take another look, and hopefully solve the problem. The other thing that we're doing here, which gets into a little bit of the using calculations to map the data we want to see, is I actually have on the table here 2 fields called upper and lower limits. The upper limit is always equal to 6. The lower limit is always equal to 4. These are calculated numbers in here, but these could also just as easily be triggered fields so that they store permanently in the database, which that's a whole nother topic. There's some great TVU documentation on that if y'all want to go check that out. But so for every record we enter, the observed value gets recorded as well as it gets logged with 2 other values of 4 and 6 that represent these upper and lower boundaries, so that they all show up on this graph. And if we look at the editor here, let's go to the format. We are in the multiple line charts, and I think we're actually on the second one down because it's automatically curving for us. It's not as staccato, so to speak. We're just mapping on the x-axis the created date. We're not grouping it at all, although we could group it by day or by week or whatever. In our case, because we only have data in for today, this would be not very useful, but maybe if you had this data entered for the last month, it would be helpful to group this by day, and we could do averages or that kind of thing. But we're not grouping it. We're plotting all 3 values that I just showed you, the observed value, the lower limit, and the upper limit on one chart so that you can see it all very easily and then drill down into individual records. This is probably one of those that's very good for lots of data as well, and data over time. Some other examples that you might use for this are, temperature at multiple locations. Some people monitor temperature in TrackVia over time, even through an integration, and you could log that in here. You could potentially have multiple locations temperatures being taken at intervals, and you could see them compared to a boundary similar to this. I can stop here for some more questions, Derek, or we can get to the other ungrouped scatter plot if you want. Oh, you might be muted. Derek, I think you're muted.
Unmute. People can hear me. Yeah, there are a couple more questions, but let's we can keep going. I think when we get to the end of this, we'll see if can answer some of these other ones.
Great. Okay, scatter plot here. Derek brought this up in his intro, so I won't harp on it, but this is another completely ungrouped view that is great with lots of data. So here we have probably like 60 records or so, and you can imagine we could triple this amount of data and it would still be pretty understandable, because scatter plots are great for trending, like seeing trends, seeing outliers, that kind of thing. Again, these are not grouped, so you can see every record that has been added in the system. And in here, we are logging an order's quantity versus the discount percentage. And you can see this probably makes sense. As the quantity ordered goes up, your discount percentage goes up as well, because we wanted to incentivize large orders. But this gets really helpful to be able to drill into a specific record. For instance, this one up here, they only ordered 20, but they somehow got our best discount percentage. That's a pretty sweet deal, and we'd love to know about why Leo was sold such a sweetheart deal. So if I was curious about this, I could follow up with the sales rep and see why that happened. So let's get into why this, or how we can build something like this in the editor here. It's pretty simple. You can just go to scatter plot. There's only one option, and you just plot the 2 values. And again, it's so simple to build because there's no grouping at all. It's just X versus Y, and every record gets its own dot. I think that is all for this one. I was just going to say this, it's pretty helpful to be able to like predict averages. So if you knew you're about to close a sale for maybe 50 units, you could see on average, maybe you're between the 4 and 6% off range, something like that. But yeah, let's hop over to a couple questions before we finish it off.
All right, so we've got a follow-on question from Ed around copying a view. Does it also copy the filter?
It does come with the same filter. It actually just uses the same filter that's built in. So if we go to that, where's the one I just made? Stack chart to line. Oh, well, we didn't have a filter on it to begin with, but if we had a filter, it would have carried over the same filter. And then you could, if you wanted to filter it in a different way, Ed, you could create a new filter and apply it to your new view if you wanted. But when you copy it using this create new function, it brings over, it will use the same filter.
Awesome. We've got a question from Bridget on the best fit line for the scatter plot, like a trend line. Is that possible?
Great question. We do not currently have something like that, like a line of regression where you could try to best fit it linearly or exponentially, that kind of stuff that my old calculator could do. We can't do it currently here, but I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. Is there, so another question from Bridget, is there a way to edit the legend on a chart to remove the words sum as part of the text? So I think in one of your top ones,
Maybe here.
Yeah, yep, there you have sum of ordered and sum of returned.
Yeah, so let's see how much we can do here. In the customize tab, this is pretty much all the like customization you can do on the axes and the legend. I don't think that you can change the legend names here, but you can change the the orientation of the legend or the presence of it at all. I don't think, the only other thing you might be able to do is you can change the field name itself, but it will still say sum of or average of, depending on whichever of these aggregators you use. But what you can change is like the name, in our case, ordered or returned. You could do that by going back to the fields and finding ordered. We could put quantity in here. And now this shows ordered quantity, and you can see that now shows up there. I don't think you can remove the sum of. Yeah.
Cool.
But I am seeing a suggestion in there that Leslie put in that, you can potentially also use a calculation to create a better name for your field. But yeah, if you want to, you can also just edit it here in the field section of your view builder.
Awesome. I see a couple more good questions that I want to save for the end.
Cool.
I think that's good for
the last one then.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so this last one here, we're going to show kind of how to do a calculation, use a calculated field or a triggered field to group your data in ways that it couldn't otherwise be grouped. So here we have the orders table again, and we're grouping by the order size. And so we're kind of categorizing our orders based on how high the quantity ordered is. And let's just go to the table editor real fast so we can show this calculation. So we have a field called order size, which is actually what we're using in that view. And this order size is a fairly simple formula. If the quantity is greater than 50, it's large. If it's 50 or less, but greater than 20, then it's medium. And then if it's 20 or less, it's considered a small order. And so every order, if it has a quantity entered, it will get one of these sizes calculated for it. And this is how we can then categorize our orders on this view. And so here, again, like Derek said, with pie charts, it's really helpful to see our proportion here, so we can see the vast majority of our orders are small orders. That's 20 or less. And in order to build this view, we chose a pie chart, and then our name or our grouping here was that calculated field that we just created called order size. That it's using the order size field that we create the kind of like pie slices, so to speak, and then with it to figure out how much of a percentage of the pie that group should take up, we're just counting the orders. We're not using the like quantity ordered, although you certainly could do that. Instead, we're just counting up how many orders of that grouping of that size, in our case, there are. So another thing that I've seen people do this with is they have a calculated field that categorizes maybe the time since a project was started. So they have a project start date, and if it's been more than 5 days or up to 5 days since the project was started, then that's a new project. And if it's been 5 to 20 days, then it's a ongoing project. And if it's longer than 20 days old, then it's a stale project, something like that. And so you could use a calculated field to do that calculation, do that categorization for you. And in that case, you'd need to use a calculated field, not a trigger field, because you need it to do that calculation for you daily, every time you load it, since it's comparing dates. But that would allow you to categorize a project based on its like freshness, its newness. Again, yeah, you can drill through to see the orders that make up this this group, and you can see everything here has greater than 50 quantity ordered. So that's using a calculation to categorize data in ways that the views themselves just couldn't. I think that's the end of my demo portion, but I'm happy to keep this open while we do some questions so we can have some like visuals as we answer them, Derek.
Cool. Yeah. I've actually been getting all the ones that I think the visuals would be helpful for.
Oh, cool.
For questions. Yeah, so I think we might be good there. Yeah, so cool. I'll go ahead and pull the PowerPoint presentation back up here. Let's see. So should see that come up. Awesome. Okay, so yeah, let's dive back into the slides here. We'll just start with some key takeaways, and then we'll get back to the remaining questions. So get your questions in now or comments now about your favorite view types in. Last chance here. So all right, key takeaways. Start by planning out your view before you start building it. Think about those 3 questions, which were who's going to be looking at it, what are you trying to show, and how much data, how many groupings might you have, right? So plan it out a little bit, and then you can try to choose an appropriate chart type or view type. Don't feel limited to just one grouping and one aggregate. You saw several examples Max showed on how you can have multiple sums or multiple averages or multiple groupings, right, to show more data in a view, right? So that is always an option for you. And then see if you can explore some of the possibilities without groupings, so you can drill down into individual records, right? Kind of a cool experience and useful in certain circumstances. You saw Max used colors in a couple of scenarios with the upper and lower limits. He turned those gray with the line red, and also on that stacked bar with different types of products being different colors. That's a great way to kind of add some additional information into your charts. And then finally, depending on what you're trying to do, you may need to create calculations to achieve some of your what you're trying to plot or chart, right? So that's common. All right, let's see. So what do we got in here for questions remaining? The first question a while back from Ed. Are there plans to add additional graph types? So periodically we do add new view types. We added the timeline, we added the calendar. The most recent one that we added was the pivot. Yeah, I don't think imminently we have another one planned, but always, if you have a type of view that you'd like to see us add to the system, let us know, because definitely we're always looking for new chart types to add. So thanks for the input there, Ed. We'll look forward to seeing your suggestion. All right, let's run through this, Max. Let's see, what else did we not ask or did not answer? Question from Michael regarding pivot functionality. So we showed a pivot view. Are there plans to extend that beyond the pivot view, the table itself, into a pivot chart to see visualizations of that summarized data? Yes, that is something that we have talked about quite a bit. Right now, there isn't a super one-click button to turn the pivot into a chart, but a lot of times, depending on what you're pivoting, you can create that same data into a chart or a view. And then what I've seen a lot of customers do is put them just side by side on a dashboard. You have the pivot on the left and then the view or the chart on the right, and they're showing the same thing, but one's the numbers, one's the data. So that's a kind of a great way that you can do that. There are a couple extra steps because you do have to manually go and create the view. But actually having that easy toggle from table to chart is something that we've talked about. Don't have a timeline though on when that might get released. Let's see. All right, maybe, I don't know if this is one you want to answer, Max. Can you do a chart to show the top X amounts of aggregates? So for example, the top 5 highest revenue lines. So instead of seeing all 10 products, just seeing the top 5.
Yeah, I've tried to do that before. I think the way you can do that is with a filter. If you know generally like what it takes to be in the top 5, you can put a filter on it to say, okay, don't show me any products that fall below this threshold. But then if a 6th one shows up above that line, then it would also fall into that view. So there isn't currently a way to do just explicitly like a top 5 or top 10. But yeah, you can use a filter to get kind of close to it.
Yep. And the other thing that I've seen customers do there is going back to using calculations to enhance what you do with charts. There is a way to look at all of your products, and this is a little bit more complex, but you can flag using a calculated field what your top 5 products are programmatically. So you can actually have them compare against each other and then flag the top 5 ones, and then just use that in part of your filter to say only show the ones that have the top 5 flag. So you can do it. It's not a setting necessarily in the view per se, but you can get to that in other ways. I think there was a related question to that here from someone else as well. I think that was, a question from Carissa around weighted averages. Same thing there. I think you would need to do some calculations before you make the chart. So while not necessarily the ability to toggle something in the chart builder, you can do that again, combining your chart with some calculations.
I also saw a question about exports. So you can export charts as well, and you have the choice to export it as a PNG, just the like image of a chart, or the underlying data. I think that let me see, I can't find exactly who asked it. It's I'm buried a little bit here. Oh, Dylan, I think, was asking about whether or not exporting pivots is the only way to export the grand totals or percentages. I actually haven't exported a pivot in a while. I don't know if those grand totals come out in the export, or if when you export a pivot table, if it just gives you the underlying data. Probably have to test that one out again, unless Derek, you remember that off the top of your head.
Yeah, for that one, I think it actually gives you the option. When you export the pivot, it asks, do you want the raw data as a CSV, or do you want the pivoted data as an Excel file? Yep. Yeah, so you can choose if you want all the summarized data or the raw data.
But yes, I think pivots are your only way to get that summary with an export, Dylan, if you want it in like Excel.
Okay. Awesome. Love all these questions. there's a lot of questions, and I'm sorry if we don't get to them all. Of course, we'll follow up via email if we don't. Why don't we read some of these ones, Max, for folks' favorite types of views, just to see what everybody had for input there. And if we have time, we can get back to some questions, but. I like, I'll talk about Mike's Pareto, because that's where Mike says he loves Paretos, because that's where you can focus the maximum amount of effort. That's the reason why I love Paretos too. It's kind of that 80-20 rule, right? You can focus on the 80% is where you should focus your efforts. So yeah, if you're not using any Paretos in your applications today, definitely check that out.
And I'll call out Bridget, who said the grouped number-based grid view with the pie chart side by side on a dashboard is really powerful, where you can see a little bit more of the numbers behind it, but then you also get the quick overview with the proportion of a pie chart. I think that's super powerful.
Jason says favorite type is a lane view, which isn't something we showed you today, but we've got a lot of lane views out in our TrackVia University website if you want to check that out. But the use case for Jason is that it says it's really easy to see where something is in a process and move it from one lane to another, right? And Jason also says maps are just cool, which I think everybody can get on board with. I think some other folks said maps were their favorites as well.
Yeah.
Dylan, multicolored bar charts. Love those. Yep, those look really good. You saw those from Max today.
And then a lot of pivot table.
A lot of pivot. Mm-hmm.
Shout out.
A lot of pivot. Yeah, pivots are awesome. Give you a lot of data in a kind of a small window. Yep. All right. Let's see, we've only got 3 minutes left here. So if we didn't get to your question, I do apologize, but we'll follow up with you via email, right? We'll make sure you get an answer, okay? So let's kind of round this out. Just to wrap things up here, we talked about a lot today. We looked at a lot of features on creating views. We didn't go into the nitty gritty on how to do that. So if you're looking for more information on how you can create views or use functions and formulas, those are things that we have available in the on-demand training. Feel free to check out the TrackVia University website to see some of that. If you're trying to create some views, you have questions, always support is there to help you out, right? You can email them, you can call them. I shouldn't say always, right? It's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time, but yeah, they are more than happy to help, and they're super knowledgeable about TrackVia. So make sure you get in touch with them if you're ever running into anything. And then, of course, shout out to Max's team, the implementation engineers. If you ever need more help, and rather than just setting up one view, if you have a whole suite of reporting that you might need help getting built out or something along those lines, and you just want help with it, we have the professional services team there to support you, right? So we've got various different ways that we can help you there, from full implementation engagements to just a few hour service packages. So always there to help you from the professional services side. Our next webinar is at the end of March. Really excited actually for this next one. We are going to be talking about the TrackVia Development Suite, which is a new product that I should say offering that we are going to be bringing to the table for our customers. So if you're interested in the TrackVia Development Suite, it's essentially a set of applications that can help you manage your TrackVia development initiatives. Definitely make sure you sign up for that webinar. And then finally, as Kim said at the beginning, we'll get the recording of this webinar over to you in 48 hours or within 48 hours. And if you have any feedback, we always love to hear it. Thank you so much for joining. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And we'll follow up with you if we didn't answer your question. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.